Who is a bad guy in history who actually wasn't a bad guy? 1. That woman who spilled McDonald's coffee on her lap. Yeah, that whole story has much more to it than the McDonald's propaganda would have you believe. From what I remember, that McD's location was serving coffee way hotter than they were supposed to, and they knew it. They had been notified of that too, but continued to serve scalding coffee. When the victim spilled her coffee, it was so hot that it essentially fused her thighs together. You can find photos online of her injury, and it is no joke. I believe she also only sued for the cost of her medical bills, but the jury determined she deserved much more, which led to however many millions she received. MCDs also have been told many times about this issue, how hot it was. People never see the whole story. They just think the lady was suing just to get money, and it wasn't. The worst part of this situation is that the crazy McDonald's coffee lady was used nationally to perpetuate the myth of frivolous lawsuits in an attempt to undermine class actions and craft a negative association with legal action. It worked too. I have defendants and potential jurors mentioning it to this day. Sometimes if they piss me off, I ask them if they or their spouse's genitals and groin suffered third-degree burns, if they'd sue. We studied this case in my law class. McDonald's knew their coffee was too hot, hotter than legally allowed. They did it to get more coffee per bean. They had been sued by other burn victims and ordered to reduce the temperature. They didn't. IIRC, the woman's labia melted and she had third-degree burns. All she wanted was medical bills covered because her insurance wouldn't cover it. In response, McDonald's started a smear campaign against her. The judge issued punitive damages, a punishment for the continued reckless behavior by McDonald's. She was awarded a single day's profit from coffee sales. That's all. 1 day of coffee profit. 2. A dingo really ate her baby. This one is so awful. Her baby was brutally killed and eaten. Imagine knowing that about your child. Then she was accused of murder. And finally, the entire world made a joke out of it. Even Elaine on Seinfeld. These poor people suffered through their lives so damn hard because people thought the death of their baby was funny. I can't even imagine their heartache. She wasn't just accused of murder. She was arrested, convicted, sentenced to life in prison. She served over 3 years in prison. The parents went on to have another baby, and Mrs. Chamberlain had to give birth in prison. Didn't they finally find baby clothes in a cave or something? Yup, they found her baby clothes in a nearby known dingo area. They are opportunistic pack animals. If they see a convenient toddler, nothing is really stopping them. I would not be surprised in the least that Aboriginals have stories of dingoes eating kids. I'm assuming this was never that common, but this case is totally not the only attack. If I remember what I read before correctly, and if it was itself accurate, the government and media were basically like, nah, dingoes aren't gonna go after people, the parents killed her, but local Aboriginals were like, nah dude, a dingo will definitely go after some random toddler, plus there's this one known dingo cave nearby we should at least check. But they were just disregarded, and everyone else kept accusing the parents anyway. 3. In Sweden, a man was arrested for the murder of his wife, but she was actually killed by a moose. They thought he had used a lawnmower to kill her because of the damages on her body. It took a long time for them to write him off as a suspect, and it ruined his life. Edit. Sources in English are hard to find, but there is a book about it in Swedish called Pa Osannolika Skal, and some documentary. Very few English articles about it, but his name is Ingemar Westland, if anyone wants to try find something. Moose are really dangerous, large, territorial, and aggressive. I'm guess a combo of goring and trampling. There are signs up in the Adirondacks here in NY warning people to keep away from them, especially mothers with calves. It's kind of like the bison at Yellowstone and such. People think plant eater equals peaceful creature who would love to take a selfie with me, and boom. 4. In Braveheart, William Wallace gets betrayed by Robert the Bruce, which never happened. He was loyal to the end. That movie made me so angry. I grew up on it, and loved it for what I assumed was a historically accurate portrayal. Not only is the movie absurdly inaccurate, the real history is arguably more interesting than the movie. There was no need for artistic restructuring. They could have just dramatized the actual events, and it would have been a great movie. My favorite detail about Braveheart is the Battle of Stirling Bridge, where William Wallace famously used a bridge to negate the English numerical advantage, think 300, and the Hot Gates. So of course the movie showed the battle on a giant, empty field, with nary a bridge in sight. It's a toss-up between this and the fact that Braveheart wasn't even Wallace's title, that takes the cake for extremely stupid Hollywood biopic inaccuracies. Even as a 12-year-old obsessed with this movie at the time, the bridge thing really irked me lol. The movie's inaccuracies overall didn't bug me, because the movie starts out with the Scottish narrator basically saying, yeah, everyone else is gonna call me a liar, but here's my version of the story. So I saw the movie as basically the biased and mythologized and exaggerated bragging around a campfire version of William Wallace. That said, even the tall-tale bullshit version of the Battle of Stirling Bridge could have put an actual bleep bridge somewhere in the scene. According to one of the crew, the director said the bridge got in the way, to which a Scot responded that the English thought so too. 5. Richard Jewell, security guard at the Atlanta Olympics, who was blamed for the bombing. He died in 2007. He won or settled libel cases against CNN, NBC, NY Post, and Piedmont College. Lost the case against AJC by a ruling of GA Supreme Court after his death. He was treated abhorrently, but at least he and his family were able to live more comfortably from the settlements. This may have been embellished in the biopic, but part of the reason the media focused on him for so long was that the FBI were dragging their feet to name Rudolph a suspect. 6. Machiavelli, one of the most honest dudes in history, and his name is instead synonymous with villainy. Niccolò Machiavelli. Machiavelli didn't invent the idea of lying or ruthlessness. He made an observation about what worked and tried to get a new gig. Now his name is synonymous with heartless manipulator. He didn't invent the game, but he did write the manual. The manual wasn't for the elites. The elites knew how to do this. It was to lift the veil for the masses so they knew what the elites were doing. Agreed. People often reduce his message down to you should be opportunistic and manipulative, which wasn't what he was saying at all. It was more that he recognized that the worst atrocities in society typically occur during or shortly after huge political upheaval, and believed that if preventing that sometimes requires being opportunistic and manipulative, then that is a price worth paying. And whilst we all have lines that we think a regime shouldn't cross and limits to what power a state should be allowed to exercise, he did have a bit of a point. If we think of the worst atrocities across history, they do tend to follow political upheaval. Had the Treaty of Versailles not sought to punish a generation of Germans, Hitler may never have risen to power in the first place. Ironically, some of the people who were great admirers of Machiavelli's philosophy, like Joseph Stalin, were responsible for the very kind of terrible things Machiavelli was warning people about. 7. Captain Hazelwood of the Exxon Valdez. He is often pictured on the helm of the Exxon swaying drunkenly, going full throttle into the reef, talking like a pirate. What actually happened? Valdez's critical navigation equipment was out of commission, faxes sent to Exxon, and Exxon told them to sail instead. Coast Guard budget cuts removed vessel tracking in the area. Green and tired crew was on duty. Request was made to relief crew. It was denied. XO, who was on con at the time, was inexperienced on the passage, and neither requested pilotage. While Hazelwood did drink that day, he was not in command of the con at the time, and was in his quarters resting. Hazelwood made a comment that he needed a drink, because of how upset he was over the situation. Exxon's PR paid off the media to blame Hazelwood. However, Hazelwood was charged with only one charge, which was for pollution. He proved he was not a drunkard, and retained his captain's license, even getting offers to sail again, which he turned down. The real villains are mass media, false news, and comedians, but Exxon's PR is spending power to keep the blame off them. Hazelwood passed away last year, after the anniversary of the spill. Random fact: the Valdez sailed until 2008 under a different name, the Oriental Nicety. 8. Anyone that is familiar with the movie 300 is aware of how it sanitizes the Spartans, and how it demonizes the First Persian Empire. The reality is that the First Persian Empire, or the Achaemenid Empire, was pretty forward-thinking for the era. This is the empire that freed the Jews from the Babylonians and gave the world the Cyrus Cylinder, which some regard as the first Bill of Rights. As for Sparta, it was a militaristic society based on social Darwinism, centuries before the birth of Charles Darwin, and it had a greater percentage of slaves than Persia ever did. Edit. I am not suggesting that the First Persian Empire was perfect. I am just pointing out the historically inaccurate and racist portrayal of Persia in the movie 300. 9. In the film Titanic, the character Murdoch killed someone, took bribes, and generally came across as a right bleep. He was a real-life person who was actually a hero and saved many lives. His living relatives were so disgusted that the VP of Fox traveled to Dalbeattie to personally apologize and presented a £5,000 donation to Dalbeattie High School to boost the school's William Murdoch Memorial Prize. That movie's initial gross was over $1.8 billion. Donating £5,000 is like the average US man giving them a dime and saying my bad. The VP probably spent more than that on the plane ride over. 10. That woman who was accused of kidnapping children because her kids didn't have her DNA, but in fact her uterus had different DNA than the rest of her body. Lydia Fairchild. She has chimerism, so her uterus has different DNA from the rest of her body, the DNA of her absorbed twin. And the twin gets the last laugh because it gets to pass on its genes, and Lydia does not. 11. Hades. He barely cheated on his wife and was loyal. He only kidnapped Persephone because Zeus told him to. He's a good father. He doesn't cause death, only what happens after. Also, he named his dog Spot, adorable. People always act like he's evil and malicious, but in all reality, he's a sweet guy. He barely cheated on his wife. In terms of Greek gods, that's the best we can get. What is barely cheated anyway? Doing stuff with the clothes on. 12. William Thomas Green Morton died broke defending his discovery of anesthesia. He was a dentist, and didn't get much respect from the doctors at the time. One of the most important medical discoveries. Anesthesia is arguably the most important medical discovery in history. Modern surgery is literally impossible without it. 13. Monica Lewinsky. It's honestly a testament to her strength that she was somehow able to come out the other side of that. I wasn't alive during that time, but I heard that the media was absolutely ruthless towards her for years. I could still see how privately she's disappointed that no matter what she does, she'll always be the person who sucked off the president. Yes, she was basically the laughing stock of every late-night comedian at the time. It was shameful how she was treated at the time. Clinton was an okay president but a despicable manipulator of women. Hillary was not much better with her comments condemning his victims. I do know that not all were victims, but the list that were as long. Lewinsky was treated horribly, I feel in some part to deflect away from Clinton's actions. He had long been accused, but those with a voice, media and entertainment, loved him overall. The same people who loved Polanski, Weinstein, Cosby, and many more still being protected. Lewinsky did have responsibility for her actions, but under these conditions, and with Clinton's status and power, I feel deserved his public humiliation. She is an inspiring individual who has endured a lot that more than many could take. Clinton has not lost out on much. In fact, many people stood up for him while beating up on her. I don't care that much about his infidelity either. That is between him and his wife. It is his victimizing of those and the many allegations that at some point someone must believe of sexual assault that make him the pawn scum that he is. The thing working in his favor now is that Trump makes him look almost saintly. She never deserved what she got. Now Linda Tripp is an awful person and never got anything she deserved. She took advantage of Monica, recorded her conversations illegally, was never prosecuted for it, and those illegal tapes were used to start the whole Clinton nonsense in the first place. Lewinsky was dragged through the mud, made to divulge aspects of her personal life to the entire world, and treated like a criminal, even though she did nothing wrong. Frankly, the entire thing was no one's business but the Clintons. 14. Dr. Kevorkian. I never considered him a bad guy, even at the time. I hate how we force people to stay alive when we'd be sued for animal cruelty, for not putting down an animal in similar pain. Anyone who thinks human euthanasia doesn't exist in the US has not been around someone dying slowly. I have been in the room 3 times now, when people I love have been given morphine and a sedative to ease their passage. With my mom, it took 2 doses. We redheads commonly need more anesthesia than normal. No one says it explicitly, but we all knew. Dying can take a long time. Sitting next to a person going through agonal breaths for hours would be excruciating. Also, they don't portray what it's really like when someone is on a ventilator in movies and TV. It pumps air into their bodies every few seconds. It's brutal and not restful. They don't look asleep. They look like someone is torturing them. Sorry, it was recent. My point is Dr. Kevorkian was a wonderful, caring man who deserves to be lauded as a hero. Humans deserve the right to die peacefully. 15. A lot of Tudor women come to mind. Catherine Howard, Mary Tudor, and Anne Boleyn. Catherine was sexually abused her entire life only for Thomas Culpeper to use it to blackmail and assault her. Almost every man in her life abused or used her, and she died a teenage girl. After her death, people made up bullshit about her wanting to be married to a rapist and blackmailer. She was a child. Mary Tudor was horrifically abused by her own father, torn from her mother, and prevented from seeing her, even as she was dying, and went on to be demonized way more heavily than her father, who was a tyrant. Mary tried her best with what she had. After her father divorced her mother, she lived with the constant threat of assassination or execution. Her own father was willing to kill her. Anne Boleyn was not a seductress who tried to steal the king. She did not want the king, and initially flirted with him to get back at a guy who courted and ditched her. She only agreed to marry Henry because she had to. Even before he met Anne, he was looking for a way to end his marriage to Catalina, Catherine de Aragon. Why? Because the only reason they were Marie was to preserve an alliance with Spain, and that fell through, and she didn't have a son. None of which was Catalina's fault, nor was Anne's. Anne Boleyn never wore yellow during the time of mourning for Catalina. Anne didn't abuse Mary, Henry did. 16. Pharaoh Cleopatra. She was actually a pretty good ruler, with her focusing more on her nation than just abusing her position for her own benefit. There's even some records saying that she wasn't even all that beautiful. She was, however, very intelligent, with stuff like how she learned around 10 different languages. First member of the Ptolemaic dynasty to bother learning Egyptian. She did amazing things in managing to actually expand Egypt's territory in a time of Roman dominance. However, in the end, she monumentally screwed up / lost her nerve at the Battle of Actium and doomed pharaonic Egypt. Thanks for watching. Remember to like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you'd like to walk next.